Alright guys, thanks for tuning in today. Yesterday I got done, I got the dash put in and the gauges wired up and installed. So all that stuff is good to go. I even tested it with the key on and stuff. But let me give you a look at that. So that's the pod with the gauges in it. I got the boost gauge back in. I have my radar detector over there hardwired in. All that needs to be done for the interior is put all these plugs back in, put all the other random dash stuff back in. But for now, I'm going to get started on finishing up the engine bay stuff, being that I have to put in the air oil separator again, and then also the intercooler. I think that's all I have to do for the engine bay left, but yeah, I'm going to get started on that. So if you don't know what an air oil separator is, this is an air oil separator. Now what it does is you may have heard of an oil catch can. So with a catch can, what it does is it takes the air/oil mixture that comes out, separates the oil out of it, and it stores it in this can so that that oil doesn't go back into your intake system. Because with the factory PCV system, some oil gets through and then it goes into your intake and you burn some oil. This is supposed to prevent that. It's also a lot better when you have a car that you're doing a lot of corners in, especially with boxer motors, since the heads are like flat. When you corner, all the oil that's in the head kind of wants to go this way, and that makes more go up into the ventilation system. Now the difference between a air oil separator and a catch can is that with a catch can you have to check it periodically and empty it out when it fills up, otherwise it'll overflow and you'll get a ton of oil in your intake. Air oil separators are maintenance free for the most part, so this one has coolant lines that go to it to condense the oil that's atomized in the air, and then it recondenses it and sends it back into the motor. But it's essentially a can with baffles in it, and then it has all these hoses coming off. This hose right here is what goes to each side of the valve cover. I think this bottom one's a coolant hose. I believe this is a coolant hose. This one goes to the PCV system. This one has a hose that's already on there that also goes, this one goes to the intake manifold. This one's also the PCV system, if I remember correctly. But I need to reference the diagram and then get this installed. It shouldn't take too long. The hardest part is knowing where stuff goes, and I've already done this before, so that shouldn't be too bad. So I had to take my air box out again, but first things first is to get the actual unit bolted to the strut tower, or whatever you call that. So I don't know how the instructions tell you to route it, but this is how I do it. So this line that comes off here and goes into the T that goes into those two hoses that go to each valve cover. So I put it right to the passenger side of the coolant line for the turbo, and then I send it down underneath in between the harness and the reservoir for the turbo coolant down, and there's the end of the hose, and that just plugs into, let's see, so that just plugs into that spare nipple next to the other hose right there. And then if you follow that this way, you can see that I tuck the hose behind. This is the brake booster line. Tuck it behind that, behind these wires right here, and I go underneath the throttle body coupler. From underneath the throttle body coupler I come out, and then it's just gonna go straight down like that into the nipple down there. They give you enough line so that you can kind of just route it on top, but that looks bad, so I don't do that. I kind of take the extra time to tuck it underneath everything so that it looks better. But yeah, that's how I do it. So now I just need to plug in all these hoses, and then that'll be done. So, air oil separator is good and installed. These two hoses, you can see, this one's the center one, and the one that's on the very bottom comes around, loops back, and then it goes into the side of the Y. This one that goes into the middle goes to the top of the Y. This hose right here goes into the T that goes to the heads. That hose below it goes to the radiator. This top hose goes down into the intake manifold, and that back hose goes into the turbo coolant line. So that's pretty much it. All the hose clamps are tightened. Looks pretty good in there. You can see the hoses are kind of up. Once you get the intercooler in, it pushes like this one back, this one to the side, and this one down. So then they kind of just sit where the hood closes without hitting stuff, and it looks better that way too. So I'm gonna get my intercooler on and put my airbox back in there. Alright, so here's the intercooler. This is a stock intercooler. It's pretty jacked up. So I was gonna do some stuff to it to make it stronger, but there's really no point. It's pretty jacked and it's not gonna last very much longer. I think there might be a leak on the end tank, so once I start throwing more boost into it, it's probably gonna leak really bad. So we'll probably be getting a new upgraded intercooler soon. But yeah, let me get the tape and the rag out of there so I can put this on. Alright, so I pulled the tape off the turbo. Just admiring how nice and new this looks. I think this turbo is relatively low miles, even though I rebuilt it, which I probably didn't have to, but I wanted to anyways. Let me show you the old turbo, what the top looks like, and just in general. So that one, the aluminum's a lot shinier. This one's pretty dull, beat up. And then look at this top right here. Oh, that's not as bad as, oh yeah, well look at that. Chewed up right on the bolt. The other one has like no real scratch, and there's something, but you can tell that that one's been on and off a few times versus this one. Pretty flat still, not too bad. These intercoolers are kind of a pain when you do them the first couple times, but once you do it, you know, 4 or 5 times, you get the hang of it. So I'm gonna slap this on real quick. Especially hard when you have a lot of extra hoses laying around in there as well. Alright, the engine bay is assembled for the most part, with the exception of the battery terminals aren't plugged in. But other than that, everything is installed. It's looking pretty stock so far, which is good. But I pretty much, what I wanted to do is I wanted to keep everything black. So like, that's aftermarket, but I wanted it to be black. When I get my aftermarket cold air intake, it's gonna be black. I just kind of want everything to blend into each other and make it look like nothing's too flashy. So, you know, it looks for the most part stock. But you know, when it has a bigger intercooler and turbo and stuff, you might see it and know that it's not stock. But it'll still look pretty normal, and it'll look like it belongs in there. I mean, even the fuel system stuff doesn't really attract that much attention. That's pretty low profile as well. Yeah, it's pretty good. I like how it turned out. Just want to get some, I just got to save up some more money to get the other parts that'll get me in the ballpark of 500 horsepower. But for now, we're going to deal with this, get used to this power level, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot faster than it was when I got the car. And this is the fastest car that I've owned. Not the fastest car I've driven, but the fastest car that I've owned. So with all this stuff I'm doing to it, it should be a lot faster. It'll be good to get used to that power before I add more on, but eventually we will get more stuff and make more power.